1991, the Yugoslavian government was falling apart, and the area now known as Croatia declared independence. And with many, just like many governments who declare independence, there's remnants of the former regime that are left over. Of course, being the intelligence community, you've got the military, and then you've got loyalists from the former regime. When the Croatian government first took over, they recognized that most of the arms depots that Yugoslavia had built actually ended up being in the countryside of Croatia. So Croatia was at an advantage during the war because they had all the ammunition, they had all the weapons, they had all the bombs and the missiles. So one of the first things that the Croatian government actually did was they issued an order to the civilian populace living around those arms depots to join forces with the militia, depose the depots themselves, and either imprison or execute the soldiers. So one by one, the arms depots fell. One by one, all throughout the countryside, except in one city called Fuzine. I had the opportunity to visit Fuzine a few years ago with an interfaith delegation. We sat with the man who was actually in charge of the city at the time. His name is Jan. Now, when Jan received the orders from the Croatian government, or the newly formed Croatian government, the rebel alliance, to actually attack the arms depots and execute the prisoners, or execute the soldiers, he had quite a conundrum at hand, because even though that the soldiers were part of the YNA, and even though they were ethnic Serb, the issue was that these ethnic Serbs had married into the townsfolk. So they had half Serb, half Croatian kids. They ate at the same restaurants, they went to the same activities, they even worshipped at the same church. So Jan had to figure out what was best for his own community, his own society for that time. He weighed his options, he took the orders to the fort, he met with the commandant, and he showed him the orders, and he said, "These are my orders from the government. I can surround you and I will kill you, or we can live in peace side by side until the end of the war. And once the war is over, you go your way, we go our way." The commandant, of course, agreed to the latter option. He would live, he wouldn't die. The town would live in peace. And through this gentleman's agreement, Jan managed to save the lives of hundreds of people in Fuzine, secured peace for the region without doing anything, just like that. By doing the gentleman's agreement, both committed treason. Jan was labeled a traitor, and the commandant of the fort was labeled a traitor as well by Serbia. They both became renegades. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, becoming a renegade. Dictionary.com defines a renegade as someone who is a traitor, as someone who is a deserter of an army. But I want to talk to you about becoming a renegade in more of a modern sense, of more of a conventional sense, of being a renegade, of someone who does something outside of the norm, someone who rebels against the norm, someone who is an agent of change. And I learned 3 lessons from Jan when I was in Croatia, and I want to pass them on to you here today. The first lesson being, he didn't whine and complain. When he saw the problem, he focused on a solution. You see, many of us, it's easy for us to identify problems. It's very easy for us to say, you know, Obama is doing this, the NSA is doing this, the Mujahid has this partition, the Mujahid is dirty. And it's easy for us to point fingers and lay blame, but at the end of the day, all that we are doing is identifying issues, identifying problems. You see, becoming a renegade, being a renegade means that you just don't point the finger outside, you point it back at yourself. That you say to yourself, you know what, I have to do something. Because in essence, if you don't change anything, if you don't do something about the issue at hand, what you are actually saying is, you live your life and I will live mine. A policy of isolationism has never worked for any government in the history of this world. A policy of isolationism has never helped a community, an organization, a city, a state, and it's never helped you. Because when you isolate yourself, you deprive other people from learning from you, and you deprive yourself from teaching others. So Jan didn't whine and complain. He focused on his problem, and he found a solution. The second, he didn't wait for permission. He just did it. In 1939, the Soviet army was marching into Latvia, and they were marching towards a town in Latvia that had both the US Embassy and had a Red Cross supply depot. And so the Vice Consul wired the State Department and said, let me fly the Stars and Stripes over the Red Cross depot because the Soviet army is going to pillage it for supplies. They were short of supplies just like any other Soviet battalion or brigade was. And the State Department responded back and said that no precedent has been established for such action. The Vice Consul, being a renegade, leaves the confines of the embassy, goes to the Red Cross depot, climbs to the top, flies the Stars and Stripes, goes back, wires the State Department and said, as of this date, I have established precedent for such action. You see, when you're a renegade, you're first in the market. You're isolated because you stand away from the crowd and you look back and you're alone. And being alone means that you're susceptible to criticism, to blame, to injury, that you're the one taking all the risk. But we know throughout our history here in America that being first in the market also means that you're going to get the most profit, that you're going to create boundless opportunity for others. Ask Bill Gates, ask Steve Jobs, right? Being first in the market is not necessarily always a bad thing. Jan didn't take permission from the Croatian government. He just did what he had to do. The third lesson that I learned from him is that he overcame his fears. He overcame his fears and he learned along the way. When I was a kid, my dad would try to teach me how to swim. Somehow my arms and my legs wouldn't synchronize and I just dropped to the bottom of the pool. I couldn't even float. After some lessons, my dad got frustrated and he got tired. We were at my neighbor's pool. He picked me up and he threw me into the deep end. Apparently, if you've had enough swimming lessons and you're drowning, you're going to learn how to swim, right? It's not the most ideal solution, it's not the best way, but it worked. You know, sometimes after you've consulted the right people, after you've made the shura, after you've done all your research, after you've done all the thinking, sometimes what you actually need is you need to be thrown into the deep end of the pool so you can learn how to swim yourself. You have to overcome your fear by jumping out into the unknown without any straps or a harness. Jan didn't know what would happen if you took the orders to the commandant. In fact, in a time of war, going to an enemy and saying, I will kill you, will likely get you killed. Before he actually went in front of a mirror, rehearsed his speech, he jumped up and down, drank a lot of coffee, he did some jumping jacks, and he went and he did it. But when he left victorious and he saved the lives of hundreds of people. You see, fear is not something that should stop you. Fear should be an indication, a large blinking green light that says, come towards me, keep moving forward, because you're going in the right direction. You see, 1400 years ago, we have the best examples of the best renegades who have ever walked the face of this earth, the companions. They faced embargoes, they were killed, they were injured, they were verbally and physically assaulted, they were made to starve, they were exiled from this land, they were forced into battle. Even on top of that, the Prophet ﷺ died. And why did they suffer? Why did they suffer from the Quraysh? All for saying, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. They stood out from the crowd. They looked back and their families didn't even join them. In fact, their families disavowed them. But they stood out from the crowd and they did what they knew was best for them at that time to get to Jannah and to be closer to Allah. They did what they had to do. They were renegades. And because they were renegades, because they stood out from the crowd and said, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, they took Islamic thought from the Middle East all the way to the far end of the world. And because of them, we stand here as Muslims today. Because they were renegades. Did you know that the only city in Croatia not to face ethnic genocide, blood, and battle was Fuzine? All because they had amongst them renegades of their time and place, but they were still renegades. Jan stood out against a crowd. He didn't whine and complain. He did what he had to do. He focused on a solution. He didn't take permission. He did what he had to do. And he faced his fears and he learned along the way. Jazakallahu khair.